It's so good to be here with you all. I'm the Director of Inclusive Hiring here at the Center for Employment Opportunities. And in my role, I have the opportunity to work with employers across the country. And because of that, I often span different time zones, right? And so now I'm with California folks, I'm home, so I can say good morning. Usually I'm like, good afternoon, kind of good morning, and depending upon where the person is. So if you're like me, you're getting your first cup of coffee in, or maybe second, but I'm so excited to be here with you this morning. My colleague John had something come up, so he wasn't able to make it today, but I'm going to go ahead and put my best foot forward and still provide you the content that we had planned. A little bit about myself. Like I mentioned, I work with employers across the country. I'm also a WAF coach, so I have the opportunity to work with USC, and I work as a consultant with the Forestry and Fire Recruitment Program, and they're also grantees. So there I supervise a team of MSW social work interns, and we help ensure that their participants have access to the supportive services that they need as they transition from prison to professional firefighting careers. And me personally, my journey started out in the reentry field in 2006 when I personally came back from incarceration. So not only have I experienced it professionally, but I know it personally. And it was tough back in 2006. There wasn't convenings happening like this. And so I'm so glad that we're able to connect here today. One more thing, I'm a social worker by trade. And so I'm able to bring my social work practices into my work directly with employers. A little bit about CEO. The Center for Employment Opportunities, we have one mission, and that is to provide immediate, effective, and comprehensive employment to people on probation and parole supervision. We span across 12 different states and about 30 different cities, and we serve about 8,000 people on probation and parole annually. Our vision is that anyone with a criminal conviction who wants to work should have the ability to do so. And so what we do is we provide immediate employment to our folks. We give them a daily pay, and then they work with our job coaches or business account managers to help ensure that they have the support that they need to successfully transition to full-time work. We love our participants, but we are a transitional employment agency. So our goal is to support them while they're with us and then send them on their way. Something interesting that we do is we provide 1 year of retention services to our participants. So after they're placed in full-time work, if they experience job loss, they can immediately plug back into our work crews, continue to earn a daily wage, and work with our job coaches or our business account managers to place them in full-time work again. All right. So we have an action-packed agenda today. We're going to spend some time unpacking the criminal legal system. We're going to talk about transferable skills learned in non-traditional places of employment, like prison. I'm going to dive into fair chance hiring, and then we're going to do a quiz on the business case. We're going to learn why it makes sense for businesses to hire people with past convictions. Before we even get any further, I just have a question for you all. Right now, how many of you are currently working with the reentry population? If you wouldn't mind putting like me in the chat, that way I can get kind of like a good view of who's in the room. Hi, Lorraine. I see some friendly faces and some names in here that I'm familiar with. It's so good to see you all. Hi, Liz. Hi, JR. Nice, Alice. Wonderful. Okay, so it looks like a portion of you have worked with the reentry population. That gives me some knowledge about how to present the next slide. So the criminal legal system, there's so much to unpack here, and really we can spend hours and hours going over each one of these slides. There's so many nuances depending upon jurisdiction, depending upon court, depending upon county jails versus prisons. So today I'm going to present just the framework of the criminal legal system, right? But please keep in mind, this is not legal advice. This is merely the way, the general way that the criminal legal system plays out. I know that this diagram looks like there are a lot of twists and turns, and it's very complicated and complex. And the truth is the criminal legal system is just that. It is complex. There are many twists and turns and caveats and different things that happen in this web, but generally I'm going to walk you through what it looks like when someone enters the criminal legal system and then when they exit. So stay with me here. So people enter the criminal legal system at the time of arrest, right? And so either that's when a crime is observed or someone is accusing someone of committing a crime. Then at that point, they can either be released without prosecution or charges are never filed or they're dropped or dismissed. So if you look at the red boxes here, that's the exit of the system. If someone is going to be held on specific charges, they then go to an arraignment, which is their first time when they appear before a judge. At an arraignment, the judge reads off the charges that are that the person is being accused of, right? Keep in mind that people are still considered innocent, but if someone doesn't have the money to bail out, or if they have not been released on their own recognizance, which means that they sign a promissory note that they're going to appear before the judge, they are held, they're incarcerated, right? So they go to court and they are arraigned on specific charges. At this point, they can either take their case to trial or they can take a plea deal, right? So a plea deal is this: the district attorney and your public defender come to an agreement and they say, if this person pleads guilty, then we will give them either a lesser charge or less time incarcerated. It's usually seen as like a win for the prosecution. And sometimes the person that's incarcerated is able to get released early. Also, if someone goes to trial, that's when they say, no, I am innocent. I am not going to take a plea deal and I want to go to a trial, okay? Something interesting here, though, is I wanted to call out that only 3% of cases actually go to jury trial. So what does that mean? That means that people, even though they're innocent, may be incentivized to plead guilty. And let me talk a little bit more about that for a second. Let's say that you are being accused of a robbery. Okay, and you are currently incarcerated because you don't have enough money to bail out. And they say that the prosecution says, if you go to trial and you lose, you will be given 25 years. If you plead guilty to a lesser charge like burglary, we will let you go home today. Right? And so there's that added pressure where innocent people know that if they go to trial and they lose for whatever reason, they potentially are facing 25 years. That's a big deal. So after the trial, whether someone goes to trial or they take a guilty plea, they're then either acquitted and found not guilty, or they're convicted. Once they are convicted, it's either a misdemeanor or a felony charge, okay? If they're convicted of a misdemeanor charge, they are sentenced to prison, they are going to go to a county jail facility. If they are convicted of a felony, depending upon the severity of the felony, they may go to the county jail or they may go to prison. In the old days, someone was not able to spend more than 1 year once they were sentenced in county jails. So automatically, if you were sentenced to over a year, you would go and serve your time in prison. But that's not the way it is anymore. So now people can spend up to 3 years in the county jail. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. Now, after someone has been sent to county jail or to prison and they serve their time, they are either released on state parole or they are released on county supervision, which is probation, right? So before, only people that had gone to prison were released on parole. But because of the realignment, now sometimes people will be released from county jail and will also be released on parole. And people that are now serving time in prison may be released on probation instead of parole. And then after they serve their terms of and conditions of probation or parole, they have completed their sentence. But we all know that a sentence is never really complete because someone with a past conviction faces 44,000 collateral consequences. It is like scaling a wall that continues to grow taller the closer you get to the top. Right? It is that extended sentence, even though you have technically completed what the judge has ordered you to do. I'm going to stop there for a second, and I just want to get some feedback. Does anyone have anything? Did they learn something through this slide? And I know it's kind of convoluted and messy, but I just wanted to get some feedback here. You can put it in the chat, or you can jump in, take yourself off of mute. 97% take a plea deal. That is absolutely right. In New York and in Los Angeles. Anyone else? All right. Incentivized to plead guilty. Yes, that is exactly right. Can someone get their record expunged even if they plead guilty? Yes, you can only get your record expunged if you have a conviction. All right, let's talk about the difference between jails and prison, okay? So as I mentioned before, people were only, in the old days, sentenced to jail for up to 365 days, right? So jails were created, the infrastructure of jails were created to only hold people for a short amount of time. Therefore, naturally, they have limited access to different types of programs because of the actual structure of the jail. We're going to talk about that. Prisons, as I mentioned, for people for longer sentences. So typically, or not typically, excuse me, jails are governed by local counties. So you have Los Angeles County Jail, you have San Bernardino County Jail, San Diego. Each county has their own jail. Prison is ran by the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Jail, people spend their time in jail if they're unable to bail out, if they're not released on their own recognizance, and it's called you're fighting your case. So it's pre-trial. And people spend years in jail fighting their case, going through that web that we just learned about. Prison, only people that have been convicted of a crime go to prison. Okay, so you have innocent people in jail fighting their case, and you have convicted people now currently staying in jail for any amount of time, but usually they put a limit on it. Access to services, and I started to talk about this just a couple of seconds ago. Because of the infrastructure in county jails, there's limited access to work release programs, limited education, limited substance use programs, and limited vocational programs. There are some jobs that people can have while they're in jail, like working in the kitchen, maybe helping, being a porter, which is like making sure that the jail, is swept and kept up, delivering mail. But in prison, because it was created for longer stays, the infrastructure also is aligned, right? So there's classrooms, there's vocational training programs, but this also depends on someone's level of custody. So someone that is in a maximum security prison may have limited access to these different types of services and programs because they're usually kept in a cell all day long. Like Pelican Bay, they had the SHU, the security housing unit. And people literally were in a cell all day long. And when they were taken to yard to exercise, they were also kept in a cage. So they had no contact with people. Minimum security prisons have access to more programs. And then there are also some other programming that we're also going to touch on in a minute that aligns with the minimum prisons, and that is like substance use treatment. They can have more visitors. It's just different because they're considered lower risk. The environment. So in the county jails, there's more of a churn, right? Because you have innocent people, you have convicted people, and there's a constant influx of people coming and going. In prison, there's predictable routines, there's structure, people kind of settle in. Naturally your mind begins to just settle in. I was talking to someone the other day, and I'll share this with the group. When you're in line for Starbucks and you're like, oh my gosh, it's been 5 minutes. Where's my coffee? And there's like this sense of urgency, right? And anxiety. When you're incarcerated, you can sit in a cell for hours and hours and hours, and your mind just adjusts. And then I furthered the conversation by saying this: jail in itself is horrific. But to me, the worst part about it was the feeling of helplessness and hopelessness that was associated with it.
So I was just thinking that is often like the mental health aspect and the impact that that environment has on folks. I think sometimes is extremely under realized when in workforce programs, because we're so focused on the training and the placement that we don't think about how beneficial support would be, because mental health support would be after being in a traumatic environment for so long.
Absolutely, totally. You know, and the further that someone is from their release, the more skills, the more experience, the more they begin to assimilate, right? And so like if you were to ask me to answer the conviction question, I have a whole narrative of what I've done since my release. But if you're asking someone to answer the conviction question and to talk about their new narrative, but they were only released 3 months ago, they're still battling that stigma. They're still battling what the correction officers and the police officers told them and what society has told them about their conviction, right? And so it's so hard to learn a new language and to be able to present yourself in a way that you feel society wants to accept when you still have all this internal conflict going on, not to mention the external barriers that we're facing. Thank you for that. People, once they are sentenced to prison, life begins with a visit to reception. And so during reception, people are kind of put on pause, and there's different types of assessments that happen at this time. First, people undergo a psychological and a medical assessment. They also are evaluated to see what type of education that they have done. And then lastly, they do a security assessment. And here they evaluate if someone has past gang involvement, if they've been to prison before, and what types of convictions they have. There's some sort of calculation that happens, and people are then assigned points, okay? This is how it goes in California. And depending upon your points, you are sent to different prisons. You have your maximum, your medium, and your minimum. While you are incarcerated, your points can also change. And so years ago, people that were given life sentences, their future was really grim. They never thought they would be able to come home. But laws are changing, thankfully. And people are now, that had life sentences, are now going to the parole board and are being found suitable to come home after serving 20, 25 years. And so what happens though, is in order to be found suitable, they probably were initially at a maximum security prison. But through different types of programming, they're able to drop their points and ultimately go to a less intense prison. So they go to like a medium, then they go to a minimum, and then they're able to go to the parole board. All right, and so while people are incarcerated, there's 3 different areas that I'll just talk about for a quick second here. There's educational opportunities, right? So people are given the opportunity to either get a GED or a high school diploma. People sometimes have access to advanced education courses. A friend of mine teaches at the Georgetown Pivot Project, and she currently works at a prison in Washington, D.C., and she has a whole program there on behalf of Georgetown. People have access sometimes, again, depending upon your prison yard, to self-help groups like Narcotics Anonymous, victim awareness, anger management, peer mentorship, and even if it's not done formally, it could be done informally. And then training. You know, the CDCR is making a really good attempt to provide training opportunities to people while they're incarcerated, such as HVAC or barbering. There is also opportunity for people to go to fire camp, which I'll talk about in a minute. But before I do, I just wanted to say, in addition to the formal training, there's often informal training, like working in the kitchen. And then, like I mentioned, the fire program. So FFRP is a great example of this. The state of California has conservation camps that after people are sentenced and they go to prison, they can apply and be accepted to fire camps. And so those are our firefighters that are working to fight fires and keep our homes safe. And they are currently still considered people in prison. And I believe this is the last slide before we transfer. So I just wanted to touch on this really quickly. Language matters. Using person-centered language is critical, right? It helps people reframe their image and their perception of themselves. And it also helps people in the community have a different perception of people with past convictions. So instead of calling someone a parolee, you can use words like a person on parole supervision. Instead of calling someone an ex-felon, you can call someone a job seeker with a past conviction. Or instead of calling someone a prisoner, you can call them a person in prison. I also want to mention that language is constantly evolving, right? And so I know personally, when I was getting my MSW degree, the title of my thesis was not a word that I would use now, right? But at the time, I was doing the best job that I possibly could to positively refer to a group of people. And so if you don't know, ask. Right? If you have a question about the appropriateness of using some descriptive language, ask the person. They can provide information to you about what they want to be referred to as. And you can also learn from trainings like this. All right, moving along. I just wanted to talk for a second about transferable skills gained in non-traditional places of employment, like prison. Right? So people gain all sorts of different types of skills while they were incarcerated. For example, there are tons of transferable skills that people experience through the incarceration process. Communication is key, right? You learn to communicate effectively with people that you are in prison with correctional officers, with your public defender. Communication is everything. Also, you probably have never met a more resourceful person than someone that has been incarcerated, right? We can make tamales out of Frito chips. We can make a purse out of chip bags. People get very resourceful because things are scarce, right? And so naturally, you tap into your resourcefulness. The ability to work in high stress environments. People, while they're incarcerated, often go to work and want to work for a couple of reasons. One being is because they can escape the chaos, the sadness, the boredom of their cell. That same routine every single day. So they go to work, right? People also go to work because sometimes they are given a paycheck. Even if they're only earning cents on the dollar, like 25 cents an hour, that can give them the opportunity to buy something to eat or to send a letter home to their family. And that is everything. So it's stressful when you go to work because you know that the stakes are high and you're also working sometimes with difficult personalities. And lastly, interpersonal skills. You learn to read people and you learn to read them very quickly. It's a survival mechanism. Let's talk about hard skills. Oftentimes, people have access to vocational training, like we just talked about, right? So they could be learning about, they could have access to a culinary arts class, or they could be working in a prison kitchen. Technical skills, they may have access to a coding program, like the Last Mile, or they could be a law clerk that is helping people check out law books in the law library. Social services. People could be learning or taking different courses about how to become an alcohol and drug counselor, or they can informally be hosting Narcotics Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous groups within their prison dorm. And entrepreneurship. People often have a desire to start businesses because starting a business seems easier than passing a background check. And so entrepreneurship programs are in high demand. People love to take them. And even if they're not taking a formalized course, there's all sorts of businesses that people have while they're incarcerated. All right, so what did we learn? Let's have a brief discussion. Let's talk about it. I know there was a lot to unpack there. What was it like going through that process?
One thing we talked about a bit was the difference between hard skills and soft skills, because a lot of times we like say skills, like, wait, which one is that though? 'Cause, we consider them soft skills, but it could easily go the other way or vice versa. So it was an interesting thing to think about.
Hey, everybody, in our group, we kind of had the same thing. We were throwing skills out, but then after we were throwing it out, we were like, all right, is that a hard skill, soft skill? Kind of, and I feel like we kind of was very judicial about it. They were like, oh, hard skill, soft skill. So it was like pretty cut and dry, but still, I think just sort of distinguishing like, all right, what is this all? And even when it was like, is this a hybrid? Because it can maybe fit both. Then we sort of had that conversation too. So that was pretty cool. And then through each case study, one of the other things that our group said is like each one was like interesting and had its own sort of skill set. So it was like, all right, well, spend a few seconds just talking about, all right, which one do we want to sort of pull out and really, sort of tease out the skills here as well. So that was cool.
Sure. Yeah. Very interesting. Thank you for sharing. When I was creating the slide deck, I actually kind of went through the same thing. Like, okay, what one is a hard skill? Because entrepreneurship, for example, could be a soft skill as well, right? Like having the skills to start your own business and to be a salesperson and to think about, and to build rapport with people. So that in itself, I think can kind of definitely be sit on the wall there. Before we close out and I hand it over to my colleague, John, who is able to join us. So I'm so excited to have him here. I just wanted to talk about the second scenario where it said, when I was in prison, I was responsible for feeding 600 people per day. I started as a dishwasher and ended as a kitchen manager. Let me share you a story about that. Back when I was a caseworker many moons ago, someone sat in front of me and they're like, I just need to get a job. I need to support my family. I'll do anything. And I said, well, what have you done before in the past? They said, I've been in prison for the past 20 years. I haven't really did much. And I said, well, tell me about what you did in prison. And the person said, well, I started as a dishwasher collecting trays and I worked my way up. I was ultimately responsible for the complete kitchen operation. I identified how much food we needed to feed the masses. I went around and did the temperature checking of the food. I made sure that we had appropriate staff to serve the food. I handled all of the issues that happened with people working with one another. They did everything. They got paid cents on the dollar for it, but they were a kitchen manager. But because of where that was earned, my friends, the person discounted it as not experienced at all. We have to encourage people to recognize these skills that they have learned in non-traditional places of employment, put value on them, and learn to articulate them in a compelling way. Right? Where an employer then begins to think, if I don't hire this person, then I'm missing out. But it takes work. We have to support people in that process to make sure that they feel like they are equipped with the knowledge and skills to begin to articulate their workplace narrative in a different way. All right, with that, I'm kicking it over to my colleague, John. Let me share my screen.
So hello, everyone. My name is John Gabriel. I'm a senior advisor with the Center for Employment Opportunities. I work on the inclusive hiring team. My director you have been engaging with for the duration of this presentation, Jenna. And we are in the business of basically, bending the wills of society to understand the importance of engaging with the reentry population. And so with that, I'm going to dive into specifically what is fair chance hiring. So it is essentially what it sounds like. It's giving people in the reentry population a fair opportunity to apply for and gain employment in positions. But something I want to go beyond, it's not just about a fair chance for those in the reentry population. It is also an opportunity for employers to have a fair chance and an opportunity to hire the best possible candidates for their open roles. And I assure you of this, in many cases, the best possible candidate for an open role may very well lie within the reentry population. And I say that because I myself am a member of the reentry population. So let's focus on the concrete specifics around fair chance hiring. So the primary area of focus is the employer's willingness to evaluate an applicant's skill before considering an applicant's past convictions. Because let's be honest, you've got an open role, it requires a certain set of what you just discussed, both hard and soft skills. If an individual possesses those hard and soft skills, then they are most likely the ideal candidate for that role. Granted, the past is the past, and sometimes unfortunate situations happen, but what relevance does that have on the present and the future? Secondary focus, of course, is for an employer to intentionally set up a workplace that is safe and welcomes people with past convictions. So oftentimes, you look at this and you think, well, that's kind of just a foregone conclusion. It's the way that we should set up things. But the reality is, it's not the way things are set up by default. And in order to make a change in the workplace, very deliberate, intentional actions need to take place to ensure that there is equity in the workplace. And that equity isn't just about creating an ideal environment for the reentry population. It is about creating an ideal environment for all minority and marginalized demographics, of which reentry population also happens to be a part of that. But it's about creating an ideal environment for all individuals to come together and perform at their optimal in their corporate environment. And of course, it can't go without being said that an employer is using their ability to employ to do social good. So we have the business model for why you should do it, because it's the way that you optimize your workforce. It's the way that you're able to fill all of your open slots. But beyond that, you're also doing it because it is the right thing to do, and it is advancing our society as a whole. So if you look across the bottom, you've got talent acquisition. The specific actions that need to take part on the part of the employer are to eliminate specific barriers to employment. So often there are federal and state regulations that have certain stipulations around past convictions, et cetera, but oftentimes employers will interpret those to the most extreme means possible in order to ensure that they sort of eliminate all potential risk. But what they are doing is they are taking themselves out of the running for employing the best possible candidates. Of course, modifying that company culture. And again, this goes back to what I said about creating an environment, not just for the reentry population, but for all minority and marginalized demographics. It creates true diversity, equity, and inclusion in your workplace. And there is statistical evidence that shows organizations operate at their best when they pursue a strong DEI agenda. And that most certainly includes fair chance hiring, specifically to the reentry population. And then again, of course, also important, the social justice aspect. Our role as a nation and as the strong is to protect those who can't protect themselves. And often when you get out of the carceral system, you are at a vulnerable point in life. And it is those empowers' responsibility to ensure that they have a pathway from where they are when they get released back to a successful and fruitful relationship with an employer that allows them to be productive members of society. Next slide. So some of the specifics around the 5 stages of fair chance employment. Brief looking here, this is the standard process that any employer would go through to employ any candidate. But there needs to be a deliberate focus on ensuring that these steps are in line with true fair chance hiring. Because again, this is not necessarily the default behavior of many corporate enterprises. And so there needs to be a deliberate effort that during the recruitment process, there is a specific focus, not just on the general population, but on all aspects of the population to include that reentry population. And again, with the hiring process, again, a very deliberate action needs to take place on the part of the employer to, again, focus in on those that may have past convictions that are part of the justice-involved population. And again, onboarding, there needs to be certain considerations taken for the onboarding process for somebody who is recently released but may be facing other challenges with supervised release, et cetera. And then, of course, talent development. The talent development is really important for every resource within an organization, not just the justice involved. But again, there needs to be specific and deliberate focus. And then finally, retention. But I can tell you this, the reentry population, because of their level of appreciation for the opportunity, retention statistically is statistically proven to show that those from the reentry population are at least as likely to stay, if not more likely, than those not from the reentry population. Hand it back to Jenna.
All right. Thanks, John. And I also just wanted to add this. It could be a simple tweak that employers make to become a fair chance hire, right? Like they could instead, it could be a whole revamp of their talent practices. And we would love that. We would love to come and partner with them and support them on their process. Or if they're in the beginning stages, it could be something like adding an inclusion statement on a job posting that says we encourage people with past convictions to apply, or we don't conduct a background check, right? So it could be something simple that an employer can facilitate on their own, or it could be a whole revamp. And at CEO, John and I and a team of others, that's what we do, is we work with employers to help them think through their background check processes. We build out talent pipelines with local community-based organizations. We help them identify ways that they can continue to provide talent development opportunities to their folks, like mentoring or specialized programs to support this unique and skilled population, and retention strategies, to think about what are some unique non-traditional benefits that could help people in their quest as they continue to assimilate and build their career. Let's do a little game of true and false. All right, any competitive people in here? I know I am. So let's do this. Shauna has a poll and we're gonna see if it works, but let's do it. So the first question is about tenure. Do you believe employees with past convictions have a high rate of turnover? True or false? The second question is about performance. Do you believe employees with past convictions perform better than employees without convictions? Employees with past convictions perform better than employees without. The third one is about quality of hire. So only half the time, someone with a criminal conviction proves to be a good hire. Is that true or false? The next one is about dependability. Do you believe that employees with past convictions are not dependable? So they are not dependable. And the last one is about company culture. Do you believe that nearly 2/3 of HR professionals state that they are willing to work with an individual with a past conviction? All right, let's get them in. I can't see the results. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and maybe I can see them that way. Okay, here we go. The first question, I see some people are still getting it there. All right, is about tenure. So employees with past convictions have a high rate of turnover. 39% said true, 61% said false. The answer is false. Employees with past convictions are no more likely to be fired and are likely to have longer tenure than employees without past convictions. And all of this data comes from the Society for Human Resource Management. In 2021, they assessed, I believe, 1,000 HR professionals, and they were able to collect this data from them. The second question, employees with past convictions perform better than those without convictions. 57% said true, 57%, 43% said false. The answer is true. 81% of business leaders and 85% of professionals believe that workers with a past conviction perform their duties the same or better than people without convictions. The next one's about quality of hire. The statement was, half of the time, hiring someone with a conviction proves to be a good hire. 78% said true, 22% false. And the answer is false. 81%, so more than half of HR professionals believe the quality of work was, quality of hire, was the same or better. The last two, number 4, employees with past convictions are not dependable. We had 4%, so one person said true, 96% said false, and that's right, it is false. 83% of HR professionals said workers with criminal records were just as dependable or more dependable. And the last one, nearly 2/3 of HR professionals state that they are willing to work with an individual with a past conviction. 65% said true, 35% said false. And the answer is true. This is an example of some of the work that we do with employers to unpack oftentimes harmful myths and biases that simply aren't true, right? And so we start here, we start dissecting these harmful belief systems. Also, I like to just focus on the last one for a second. Sometimes when we work with employers, one of their most common beliefs is if I start to hire or create like a fair chance hiring initiative, my employees, my current workforce, they're going to be in uproar, right? They're not going to be happy. And that's false, right? We just learned that's false. More often than not, the workforce is willing to work with people with past convictions. And at CEO, we're here to help them along in their goal. All right, I'm kicking it back over to John, and I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to wrap it up here.
So of course, we're here to present important, truthful information about the opportunity to work with the reentry population. And so, of course, I'm certain that each of you has been inspired by the words that you've heard, and you may be thinking to yourself, okay, this is definitely something that I believe in. This is something that I want to do. Where do I start? So let's point you in the direction of some of the existing resources that are available. Next slide. So it goes from an idea of, okay, this is something that I want to do as an employer. I want to pursue being a genuine fair chance employer. How do I turn what I have articulated to myself and others into a true walking the walk in activities of daily corporate life? One area to start is within the human resources area. So Jenna just mentioned the Society for Human Resources Management, and I think I shared one of their studies that we reference in this particular slide. They have a Getting Talent Back to Work certification program, and the only thing that it costs you to go through this certification is your time and your commitment. This is out there, it's available. And as I understand it, the content was developed in collaboration with a very influential organization. But again, that's something that is out there. It's readily available to everyone. I myself have taken it as extremely important and useful information from a human resources perspective in terms of looking at the various populations within the US and employing for best possible outcomes within an organization. There's also the National Reentry Workforce Coalition and the Second Chance Hiring Initiative. Both of these are organizations that have a tremendous amount of information and specificity around what you can do as an organization to ensure that your daily business practices are in line with genuine fair chance hiring. And of course, there are also employment platforms such as LinkedIn and Indeed that specifically have identifiers that will allow you to select candidates that are from the reentry population. Obviously, you want the best possible candidate for the job. And again, I want to reemphasize that in many cases, the best possible candidate from I need these skills, I need these certifications, I need this level of education and experience can come from the reentry population. So as an employer, don't miss out on hiring the best possible candidate by ignoring what is a very, very valuable source of potential employees. Next slide. And of course, we as an organization do quite a bit of work almost exclusively in the reentry space. We do it through a variety of programs, but we can also work with you, with your organization, with anyone who is interested in mobilizing truly their fair chance hiring practices. We can offer a significant amount of existing tools to essentially transform your entire HR department into a genuine fair chance hiring machine. And again, it's not just about the reentry population, it is about getting the best possible candidates from every population that exists within this country that are oftentimes overlooked because of both conscious and unconscious biases. We also offer significant amounts of consulting that can help organizations take a given or a fixed type of corporate culture and transform that corporate culture into something that is most certainly rooted strongly in diversity, equity, and inclusion, which ultimately results in fair chance hiring for all populations. And then, of course, talent and pipeline development. At the end of the day, it's all about the business case. And the business case is, if you've got open roles that you're having a difficult time staffing, we can help you ensure that you have the right talent for those roles by accessing all of the various populations that exist within our country, including that reentry population.